Your lab coat's wrinkled, Carter sneered across the open office floor, like he was running a fashion show instead of a federally funded clinical trial. Just saying, optics matter now that we're a real company. I had barely been there 6 weeks, and already this walking haircut with a LinkedIn addiction was offering me wardrobe advice, as if that had anything to do with managing $75 million in federal research funding. I didn't respond, just noted it, mentally filed alongside the other 46 red flags this trust fund toddler had waved since I walked through the door. The first was day one, when he introduced me to the team as our science lady, and then told the board I'd mostly be handling admin on the grant stuff. For clarity, I'm the principal investigator. The PI. The only person legally authorized to manage, direct, or spend 1 red cent of that grant. I was recruited to lead the research protocol that underpinned the entire company's valuation. And yet here I was, being asked if I could also book lunch for his branding call with the crypto guys. By the way, before we get too deep into this clown rodeo, if you've made it this far, and you're even remotely enjoying watching me professionally survive a fire at the biotech circus, go ahead and subscribe and tap that like button. Helps the team keep bringing you stories where science meets scandal. All right, let's get back to Carter, king of burning down startups in $500 sneakers. Carter was technically acting CEO, though that title felt like a Halloween costume he hadn't taken off since his dad gifted him the role. He had no formal training in biotech, medicine, or federal grant compliance, but he had once launched a failed NFT for dog yoga, and apparently that's enough to make you a visionary in this town. The board loved him, or more accurately, they loved how confident he was while being consistently wrong. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's not uncommon for founders to loop in family, and I've worked with plenty of startup execs who came in cocky and left humble after being educated by reality. But Carter wasn't interested in learning. He was interested in performing, and I was just another inconvenient prop who refused to stay in the background. The lab team respected me. The real scientists knew my credentials, knew I'd been running multi-million-dollar trials long before Carter finished his minor in disruptive innovation. But Carter had a way of warping reality around him. In meetings, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to re-explain my own clinical timelines like he had written them. When I submitted the formal PI report to the federal agency portal, he changed the title slide to include his name and sent a copy to our investors like he had filed it. At first, it was just offensive. Then it got risky. One Thursday morning, I walked into the office and found Carter sitting in the conference room with the CFO, sketching out a funding plan on the whiteboard. So we'll just transfer $5 million from the federal account to marketing, run the campaign, boost pre-orders, then replenish it after the Series B, he was saying like this was some lemonade stand money shuffle. The CFO looked unsure, but Carter was animated, high on pitch decks and espresso shots. When I stepped inside, he grinned. Ashley, perfect timing. We're gonna need you to authorize a transfer today. From the federal grant? I asked, blinking. Obviously, he said, still grinning. You're the PI, right? So just check whatever boxes they need and move it over. We'll have a party with investors next week, big splash. Trust me, this is how things scale. No, Carter, this is how people go to prison. That's when I felt it deep in my gut, not just annoyance, not just insult, concern. He wasn't just playing CEO anymore. He was playing chess with a grenade and daring me to take the next turn. I didn't raise my voice, didn't scold or lecture. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, I'll review the grant terms. But you should probably talk to legal before assuming we can repurpose restricted funds for party. He rolled his eyes. Jesus, Ashley, it's not a party, it's a launch experience. Right. And my job, apparently, was to clean up the ashes once his rocket exploded. So I went back to my office, locked the door, opened the federal grant agreement, and reread every single clause. And I made a new folder. I named it Chain of Custody. Inside it, I dropped the email thread, the recording, a PDF of the whiteboard scribbles I'd photographed on the way out. The circus had opened. I wasn't part of the audience. I was the only person who knew the fire code. The invite came through Slack at 7:12 a.m. like a caffeine-laced slap. CEO meeting mandatory. 8 a.m. Conf room A. No agenda. No subject. Just that Carter had summoned us all like a low-budget Bond villain. I walked in sipping lukewarm coffee from the breakroom Keurig and took my usual seat near the end of the table. Carter, naturally, sat at the head like he'd earned it through anything but nepotism and birthright. All right, team, he said, clapping like a gym coach hyped on pre-workout. Let's get into strategy mode. Behind him, the screen lit up with a Google slide titled, Q3 Hype Stack Let's Go. I almost choked on my coffee. He launched into his plan like it was the Sermon on the Mount. A blitz campaign targeting biotech influencers, a thing? Pop-up activation zones at conferences, branded lab coats, TikToks with fake researchers yelling we cured it, and a keynote speaker who was, no joke, an ex-reality star turned neuro-wellness entrepreneur. Total budget, $5.2 million. Source, slide #6, federal grant discretionary funds. I leaned forward just slightly. Carter, those aren't discretionary, that's federal research money. He blinked like I'd spoken in Morse code. Right, but like it's our money, right? The company's. No, I said slowly. It's the government's. We're stewards. It's bound by scope of work, budget justifications, line items reviewed and approved by the NIH. There's no influencer zone in there. You can't use it like this. He chuckled, smirking at the CFO beside him like I was a confused intern. Ashley, this is why I brought you into the room. You're smart, no doubt, but you don't get startup velocity. We can't afford to play small. You want results? You gotta scale, disrupt, pivot. You want to misappropriate federal funds. That's not scaling, that's fraud. Silence. Real silence. Even the CFO stopped breathing. Carter looked at me, still smiling, but there was a twitch in his jaw now. I think we can reframe the line items. Reallocate. The feds aren't going to audit a marketing sprint. He was wrong, dead wrong, but he didn't care. I glanced at the others in the room, product managers, data analysts, one terrified HR rep pretending to take notes, and knew none of them would back me. They didn't have to. I wasn't here to win a popularity contest. I was here to keep us out of federal prison. I won't authorize it, I said. Calm, firm, I'm the principal investigator. The terms of the grant specify I have sole fiduciary control over all expenditures. You'll need my signature. You won't get it. Carter just laughed. Not a real laugh, one of those condescending, tech bro scoffs that sounds like it's echoing off an imaginary podcast mic. You're overthinking it. I'll send it to Rick, he said, nodding at the CFO. He can get the ball rolling. Paperwork's just paperwork. And just like that, he ended the meeting. No vote, no discussion. Just stood up and walked out like a man who thought consequences were a myth, invented by people without trust funds. Rick caught me in the hallway afterward. He looked pale, sweaty. Ashley, I just want to clarify, if Carter sends a transfer request, you're not liable, right? I stared at him. If you touch that account without documented PI approval, you are. So is Carter. So is anyone who processes it. He nodded, swallowed hard, and practically ran back to his desk. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. My job wasn't to babysit. It was to protect the research, the lab, and every damn honest person who believed in what we were building. If Carter wanted to play CEO with other people's dreams, fine. But I wasn't going to let him gamble with mine. That day, I filed 3 things. A formal memo to the grant agency flagging an internal dispute over fund usage. A locked PDF of Carter's slides, annotated. A copy of our conversation, transcribed from the office recording software that no one remembered still ran during team huddles. My resolve didn't just harden, it calcified. Because this wasn't ego anymore. This was ethics. And I had every intention of being the last adult standing when the startup's sugar high finally crashed. The subject line was surgical in its vagueness. Updated org chart for visibility only. It hit my inbox just before 9 a.m. on a Monday, sandwiched between a reminder about fridge cleaning etiquette and an invitation to Carter's fireside hype chat with some VC-backed influencer who once sold protein powder shaped like Abraham Lincoln. I clicked the chart and stared at it for a solid 30 seconds before I even blinked. There I was, bottom third. Project lead clinical ops, not principal investigator, not executive director, not even a dotted line to the federal compliance office, just project lead, like I was managing a bake sale instead of a $75 million government research program. No memo, no meeting, no conversation. I forwarded it to HR. 2 hours later, a junior generalist named Tara popped into my office, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of her own discomfort. So, this is part of a broader cleanup effort, just standardizing titles across verticals. You know how startups get messy? You're still doing the same work, it's just optics. Optics, I repeated. Right? She nodded too eagerly, clutching a manila folder like it was a life preserver. We're simplifying things for investors. Principal investigator was confusing. It's a federally recognized legal role, I said. It's not confusing. It's codified in the grant contract. She blinked. I can escalate that if you want. I didn't answer. Because what was the point? HR here was basically just a mop with email access. That afternoon, I found out I'd been removed from the quarterly sync with our lead investor and the NIH program liaison. A calendar placeholder had been sent to everyone. Except me. I only knew it was happening because one of the junior scientists accidentally let it slip when asking if I'd reviewed the updated pitch deck. What updated deck? I asked. The poor guy went white. I pulled it from the shared drive. Slide 2 hit me like a brick to the jaw. Vision 2.0 accelerating biosolutions in the metaverse. Right beneath it, plastered in full color, was the NIH grant logo. Stretched, pixelated, misaligned. He'd used federal branding to pitch a spin-off about VR diagnostics and blockchain health tokens, complete with a cartoon giraffe wearing a lab coat and augmented reality glasses. I wish I was making that up. The next day, he posted a selfie on LinkedIn from the Startup 360 showcase, standing in front of our research schematic while holding a branded cocktail that looked radioactive. The caption read, "When science meets scalability." Shout out to our amazing science team for making this vision real. You know who you are, smiling emoji, #blessed. That was the moment the humiliation stopped stinging. It calcified into something colder, more precise. They weren't just ignoring me, they were trying to erase me. I wasn't supposed to fight back. I was supposed to nod and say thank you when they called me Science Lady and stripped my name from the grant deck. I was supposed to sit quietly in my lab while Carter turned our research into a joke fit for a VC wine mixer. But I didn't get here by being quiet. I pulled out my notebook, handwritten, as always, and began updating the timeline. Every meeting I was excluded from, every document scrubbed of my title, every misuse of the grant insignia. I didn't ask for explanations anymore. I documented, I screenshotted, I archived. I called the NIH program liaison directly, told him I had concerns. He didn't say much, just said, if you have documentation, send it to this secure link. OIG will handle the rest. Then he added, make sure your name stays on the contract. Don't let them touch that. I didn't plan to. Carter thought this was his show now, that removing me from a meeting was the same as removing me from power. But he didn't understand how the federal ecosystem worked. This wasn't a startup grant from some incubator that handed out checks and forgot your name. This was a high-stakes, compliance-wrapped contract with forensic accounting built into the terms. And guess what? My name wasn't just on the grant. It was on every single disbursement line. You can call me project lead all you want, but I still held the keys to the vault. The phrase chain of custody kept echoing in my head like a metronome set to contempt. Every time Carter opened his mouth in a meeting, every time someone from the strategy pod forwarded me another hacked-up deck repackaging our clinical research as a neurobranding opportunity, I heard it. Chain of custody. Document everything. Don't argue, just collect. So I started building a file system. Not metaphorical. Literal. Color-coded folders, each with backup PDFs, cross-reference Slack exports, and emails forwarded to a secure off-site inbox. There were subfolders labeled unauthorized budget requests, marketing overreach, and my personal favorite, Carter being Carter. At 11:43 a.m. on a Thursday, he sent a Slack message to the CFO that read, "Can we just move $200K from line 18 and call it a software pilot? Ashley doesn't need to sign, right? It's internal." I screenshotted it, then exported the thread, including the CFO's nervous emoji reaction. Into the folder it went. At 3:17 p.m., he emailed a revised reorg memo, backdated 2 weeks and CC'd to HR. In it, I was labeled as project consultant with zero decision-making authority. The signature block, forged, sloppy cut and paste of my name, wrong font. I printed it, highlighted the forgery, then attached a note. This never happened. There wasn't a single explosion moment, just small repeated violations that stacked like matchsticks. And Carter, bless his moronic soul, kept lighting them. I called the NIH program officer again. No small talk this time. I have proof of forged documents, unauthorized funding requests, and improper branding use. Do I send it to you or straight to OIG? He didn't pause. Send it to this encrypted Dropbox. Title it with the grant ID. Someone from oversight will follow up. Is there anything I should stop doing? Just keep doing your job. Don't escalate internally. If there's misuse, we'll see it. But don't tip them off. He hung up. That was it. That night, I called my attorney, not the corporate one Carter's dad hired to cover risk, but the one I'd used during my last NIH grant renewal. A woman who read 80-page compliance appendices for fun and once scared a Harvard postdoc into rewriting a budget line with 3 words. Try me again. She answered on the second ring. You're being squeezed out, aren't you? I'm being erased. Then here's what we do. We went line by line through the PI clause in the grant. Not only was my role non-transferable without written federal approval, it was tied to performance disbursements, intellectual property jurisdiction, and trial site certifications. No Carter, no acting CEO. Not even the board could override it without triggering a full federal review, which meant if they pushed too far, the entire grant could be frozen. Good, she said. Let them keep playing CEO. You just keep the receipts, so I did. I archived voice memos of hallway comments. You're not on this invite because it's more vibe than data, Carter once said before a call with Pfizer's innovation arm. Clip saved. In another meeting, he rolled his eyes when I mentioned protocol compliance and muttered, "Science people always think they're the smartest in the room." Saved, indexed, uploaded. Even the lab interns started whispering things to me. "Hey, just so you know, they used your grant slides at the investor happy hour last night," or "I found this budget version with your name deleted. Want a copy?" They wanted me to know. They didn't trust him either. By the end of the week, my folders had grown so vast I started labeling them with timestamps just in case. Each one opened like a crime novel Carter had written in real time. And the thing about crime novels, the villain always gets cocky right before the fall. That's what this was now. Not damage control. Not even revenge. It was strategy. I stopped defending myself and started preparing for the breach. They thought I was locked out of power. But I was just watching the cameras. They made the announcement on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Tuesdays are supposed to be quiet, middle-of-the-road, coffee-fueled productivity days. Not the kind of day you get publicly demoted under the banner of empowerment and clarity. Carter stood in front of the company all hands with the posture of someone who thought standing on a stage automatically made him taller. Behind him, on the TV screen, a new slide deck glowed in Comic Sans-level arrogance. A single line stretched across it. Ashley will be stepping back to focus exclusively on lab operations, where her brilliance truly shines. I didn't step back. I wasn't asked. I wasn't even told. To add insult to idiocy, Carter introduced the new acting PI like he was awarding a game show prize. We're excited to welcome Jake Bradford into a new leadership role. Jake and I go way back. He's a biotech visionary. Just wrapped up some amazing work with virtual enzyme modeling. Jake waved awkwardly, like he was realizing mid-smile that he'd walked into a job with landmines under the welcome mat. Jake wasn't a PI. He barely met in his eligibility criteria. But he was Carter's former fraternity brother, and apparently that came with instant clearance to hijack a federal research grant. I stood in the back of the room, arms folded, unreadable. When it was over, nobody looked at me, not directly. A few coworkers passed me in the hallway with tight nods and sympathetic eyes. One intern dropped a protein bar on my desk like I was recovering from surgery. I smiled, said thank you, and quietly opened my laptop. That afternoon, the quiet rebellion began. One by one, scientists started appearing at my door like ghosts from a battlefield, eyes darting, voices low. Hey, Ashley, just wanted you to know the deck Carter used at BioFuture. Your data was in there, just rearranged. Your name was gone. Something's weird in NetSuite. There's a batch of invoice approvals under Jake's credentials, but the vendor ID matches one from your initial procurement plan. Thought you should see it. I checked the lab schedule and there's an external audit scheduled for next week. No one told you? By Thursday, I had over a dozen fragments, each one small, plausible, deniable. But together, a picture was forming, and it looked like fraud in a startup hoodie. That evening, I got the final push. An email landed in my inbox from a generic-sounding address, grantcompliance@ashembioticfedus. Inside, a short note referencing the recent budget reallocation notice submitted by our internal grants administrator. Attached was a PDF with a familiar title, Q2 Updated Budget Justification, Ashen Biotech. PDF. I opened it. Carter had submitted a completely fake budget to the agency. It listed $1.2 million in accelerated hiring needs, $600K in community outreach, and a suspiciously round $400K marked as strategic media investments. Most galling of all, he had signed it under my name. Forged. Again, the attachment included a request for my confirmation. I stared at it for a full minute, not angry, not panicked, just still, then I clicked reply. In the body of the email, I typed exactly one sentence, acknowledged, I have retained legal counsel. No signature, no smiley face, no over-explaining. I hit send. A strange calm washed over me. Because here's the thing about silence, people confuse it for surrender. They think quiet means invisible, that if you're not yelling, you must be powerless. They forget that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one taking notes that'll bury you. Carter thought I was sidelined, that by announcing my step back, he'd effectively neutered me in the eyes of the team and the board. He couldn't see the trap he'd walked into, couldn't fathom that I'd been preparing it with surgical precision. He mistook compliance for weakness. He mistook calm for submission. He forgot that I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed the truth, and a paper trail, and I had both. The meeting invite came through on a Friday afternoon, that cursed window of time when people like Carter love to drop their worst decisions, right before the weekend, when adrenaline fades and accountability goes quiet. Subject line: Board votes strategic realignment and grant oversight simplification. The kind of corporate speak that sounds like it came from a buzzword blender and a bottle of Xanax. The body of the email was short. Meeting scheduled for Monday. Location, Boardroom East. Duration, 30 minutes. My name wasn't on the agenda, but I was CC'd, tacked on the invite like a participation trophy. No decision-making role, no voice, just a courtesy. I stared at the calendar block and said nothing. At 10:07 a.m., Carter strutted into the lab floor with the swagger of someone who thought manipulating a grant made him a visionary. He made a show of it, leaning against a desk, fake laughing with a product manager about deck polish and investor readiness, whatever that meant in his delusional little glossary. Then, for no reason except spite, he turned to me in front of the entire lab team. "Don't worry, Ashley," he said, voice syrupy and smug. "After Monday, I'll be free to focus entirely on pipettes and lab coats. We've got the leadership piece covered. You've done enough. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't even personal anymore. It was theater. His theater. A little humiliation interlude before his big boardroom finale. I closed the freezer door I'd been inventorying, straightened, and met his eyes. "Let's all be very precise with our language," I said, tone so even it sounded pre-recorded. "This is a federal grant. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to the board. It belongs to the people funding it, and the terms are legally binding." A hush fell over the room. Carter chuckled, but there was a flicker behind his eyes now. That look someone gets when the math doesn't quite add up and they realize they've been carrying a decimal in the wrong place for weeks. Later that day, I got a Slack ping from one of the newer biostats analysts. "Just FYI, Carter asked me to update the Phase 2 milestone dates to look more dynamic in the board deck. He didn't want to wait for the actual data review. Do you want a copy? Yes, I did. I saved it under a folder labeled Pre-Vote Edits and filed it beside the fake invoice Carter had approved for a consultant whose LinkedIn profile didn't exist. The pressure was building. You could feel it in the air, like the tight humidity before a Midwestern thunderstorm. Whispers in the hall, the sudden increase in HR walk-in talks, the way the CFO started avoiding eye contact like it was contagious, but I didn't flinch. I updated my timeline. I ran a final audit on the exported communications archive. I double-checked my compliance credentials, reconfirmed the grant clause language, and sent one last, quiet email to the federal agency with the subject, PI status reaffirmation request. The response came quickly. 3 lines. As principal investigator of record, you retain full fiduciary control until a formal transfer is approved in writing by our agency. No such transfer has been submitted or granted. Attached, my original designation letter. Signed, stamped, untouched. Carter didn't know it yet, but Monday's vote wasn't going to go the way he thought. Because the board could vote on org charts, job titles, even restructure the company's deck of cards, but they couldn't change federal law. And come Monday, I wasn't showing up alone. I clicked accept on the board invite with the kind of deadpan smile you reserve for rigged games and funerals. In the notes, I typed 6 words. I'll be bringing 2 external observers. Didn't name them. Didn't explain. Let them stew. Across town, those observers were already working. One was a federal compliance officer with NIH credentials and a laptop full of regulation PDFs. The other was a federal agent from the Office of Inspector General who smiled like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to ruin your month. They had spent the last 72 hours reviewing my files, every exported Slack thread, every backdated memo, every expense line Carter tried to disguise as digital ecosystem enhancement. Their response had been dry, clinical, brutal in its silence. Misappropriation indicators present. Compliance irregularities confirmed. Recommend presence during vote. That was it. Meanwhile, Carter must have sensed something shifting because the desperation began to ooze through his normally confident nonsense. His outfits got more aggressive. All black, gold-rimmed glasses. Talking louder in meetings like that made him right. He started referring to the upcoming vote as a necessary evolution of leadership strategy and told staff we were entering our quantum execution phase. On Friday at 5:41 p.m., I received what would be his final error. An email. Subject line, Q3 funding allocation for your signature. The body was a short, arrogant paragraph about staying ahead of the curve. Attached, a fabricated invoice requesting $2 million from the federal grant disbursement account to a consulting firm with a name so generic it sounded AI-generated, Helix Optimized Solutions LLC. I searched the entity. Registered 3 weeks prior. No employees, no website, address, a UPS drop box in Miami. The authorization line had a blank space for principal investigator signature. I didn't reply. I didn't correct him. I just dragged the email into my chain of custody folder, flagged it, and forwarded it directly to the OIG contact and the NIH program liaison with a subject line that simply read, "Follow up on prior concerns." Then I shut my laptop and poured a glass of wine. The silence that followed was delicious. Carter didn't respond, didn't ping. Not even a passive-aggressive Slack emoji. I imagined him pacing around his rooftop condo in those dumb no-lace sneakers, trying to figure out why his CFO suddenly asked for written indemnity language and why HR had gone radio silent. Over the weekend, I received only one message. From my attorney. They're rattled. You're holding the fuse. Monday you light it. Just be professional. Let them self-destruct. So I slept like a stone. And at 7:58 a.m. on Monday, I walked into Boardroom East, badge clipped, blazer buttoned, folder in hand. Behind me, 2 guests followed in quietly. One wore a plain black suit and glasses. The other carried a federal binder with a gold seal on the front. Neither smiled. Carter was already inside, cracking jokes to the investors about our brilliant new chapter and reclaiming operational alignment. He didn't look up when I sat down. He should have. Before we start, Carter said, adjusting his cufflinks like he thought this was a runway and not a reckoning, I just want to thank Ashley for her incredible service. Science, after all, is the backbone of innovation. But as we scale, we need leadership that understands business velocity. He smiled at me across the long, gleaming table, a shark smile. No sincerity, just teeth and strategy. We've got an exciting vote today, he continued, looking around at the board members who half smiled back, likely more focused on the quasas than the legal landmine beneath the table. And once this reorg passes, Jake and I will take things from here. Ashley can get back to what she loves, pipettes, and whatever that thing is with gene activation. The room chuckled. And that's when a voice, calm, male, unhurried, cut through the air like a blade. Is this the man attempting to misappropriate $75 million in federal funds? Silence detonated in the room. It was the agent. He stood at the far end of the table, badge visible now, ID clipped to the front of his jacket. He wasn't dramatic. No badge flash, no raised voice. Just a question surgical in its clarity. Carter blinked. I'm sorry, who the hell? Special Agent Curtis, Office of Inspector General. The man replied evenly. You submitted a budget justification using a forged signature. You attempted to authorize a $2 million transfer to a shell company. You branded federal research materials without authorization. I'd like the CFO to confirm whether or not this man is, in fact, the acting CEO responsible for those actions. Every pair of eyes snapped to the CFO. His face had gone the color of printer paper. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I believe so. Yes, that's Carter Langford. Legal counsel dropped their pen. Literally, it clinked against the table like a gun had gone off. Carter stood frozen, not defiant, not angry, just confused like a dog who finally caught the car and doesn't know what to do with it. I opened my folder and slid it across the table. Every document was indexed, time-stamped, printed on heavy paper. Emails, Slack transcripts, backdated memos, budget discrepancies, vendor lookups. Even a screenshot of the fake consultant's business registration, with a red arrow pointing to the UPS mailbox listing. Agent didn't even read them aloud. He just nodded. Thank you, Dr. Miles. We verified all of this on our end. This folder will be entered into our formal review. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even blink. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving I was smarter or stronger or more important. It was about protocol. It was about the grant. It was about the truth. One board member finally cleared his throat. What happens now? The agent turned to him. That depends on the cooperation we receive. But for starters, I'd recommend suspending all executive decisions pending legal review. That includes any vote planned for today. Silence again. The founder, Carter's father, looked at me, finally really looked at me, and said in a small voice, Ashley, why didn't you come to me directly? I did, I said. And I had, 6 weeks ago, when I said no. But no one listens to the woman in the lab coat until the guy with the badge shows up. And now, here we were, protocol, used like a scalpel. The moment the words under federal investigation left Agent Curtis's mouth, Carter deflated like a bouncy castle in a windstorm. No tantrum, no defiance, just silence. His ego didn't know how to process consequence, like a video game glitching when the main character gets shot for the first time. I'm sorry. Under what authority? He finally stammered, voice cracking like he was 13 again, and just found out Santa isn't real. The authority of the Department of Health and Human Services, Curtis replied, sliding a document onto the table. You'll want to forward this to your attorney. Preferably one who specializes in white-collar defense. Carter reached for it with fingers that twitched like they were remembering how to work. His lip moved like he was going to say something heroic. He didn't. The board chair cleared his throat and looked to legal, who nodded solemnly, already thumbing his phone under the table. The board moves to suspend Carter Langford effective immediately. Pending review, the chair said, like he'd been practicing it in the mirror for days. We'll notify investors of the temporary leadership transition. Someone whispered Jesus Christ under their breath. Another board member leaned into the CFO and muttered, You're gonna want your own guy for this. CFO just nodded, blinking hard, as if this was the first moment he realized he could go down with the ship too. The IPO deck on the conference room screen suddenly looked like a museum exhibit for hubris. The silence swelled again. Then slowly, one of the quieter board members turned to me. Older, sharp, the kind who listens more than he talks. Dr. Miles, he said, can you stabilize the grant program? I didn't answer right away. I stood, took a breath, and met his eyes. I never let it destabilize. I gathered my folder, nodded once to the agent and the compliance officer, and walked out of the room. No applause, no fanfare, just the soft squeak of the door closing behind me. By Thursday, the company website had removed Carter's name. By Friday, the IPO was postponed indefinitely. By the following Monday, the CFO was transitioning into an advisory role, and Jake, the frat bro acting PI, had gone completely dark on Slack. But me, I was exactly where I'd always been. In the lab, coat on, gloves snapped, pipette in hand, running assays, guiding interns, filing the real work. The only change? My reporting line now went directly to the federal agency. No more Carter, no more boardroom charades, just science, protocol, and peace. I didn't need revenge, I had precision. And that was always the sharpest weapon in the room. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.